Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic show. It is about 9:48. It's Saturday. Happy Saturday, everyone. Hope everyone is enjoying the weekend so far. It's been very mild. I went to see some music. Went out to dinner last night, and I literally wore a blazer all night, even outside. And I went for a walk. So unbelievably warm, and so on one hand really cool, really great. On the other hand, really strange because we're at the very tail end of February here in the middle of winter, and it's crazy. But anyway, so this show is kind of a complicated show, and it's going to be centered on a movie, a documentary, but also the unusual circumstances and kind of an explanation. And I think it leads to a topic that's really important. And it was, I don't know, for me personally, I've never had it happen. And again, with film and all things that involve film or filmmaking, movies that I love, directors that I love, styles, different genres that I love. On one hand, it's about hopefully being entertained or moved or taken being taken someplace for a couple hours out of the mundane. Just having that experience, and it's entertainment first and foremost, and that's what movies are. But there are obviously films and themes that are explored by films that really are personal, or they affect you in a personal way, and they're meant to, on one hand, to entertain, but then they also can really rattle your personal cage. By looking at things, subject matters that are not really talked about, and also tackling certain issues where there's a taboo around it. Where it explores this subject matter that is kind of in the dark kind of underbelly of certain things. So I think films and have that capacity to reach and to affect someone on many levels. I did an interview with Asif Akbar, a really happening director these days, and he's worked with some of the greatest, and currently is in the past and also now. He's worked, with some of the biggest kind of actors in Hollywood, and so he's got that experience, and it was a really interesting show talking to him about the perspective of the world of film from the perspective, from the lens looking out of the director, if you will. So it was a really interesting, you know, perspective. It was very unique. I wanted to keep the show whenever I do interviews with people, and again, that's my favorite thing to do with this show. Obviously, I don't get to do as many interviews as I would like to do, just because it's mainly the hardest part is the scheduling. That can be pretty hard and taxing, but usually it's worthwhile when you can make it happen. So, and the logistics around that. So it makes it a little bit more challenging. I don't get to do as many interviews as I like, but I do have quite a few up on this channel, and it is something that I want to continue doing. So they will be more interview segments coming up. I don't have currently anything scheduled, but I have lots of ideas. So it will be something that happens. But I wanted to kind of create that interview around the idea of the perspective from the director. So I try to always look at things. I have my own opinions. I have my own views on certain things, but I like to think I have a flexibility, meaning that most of the time, even if it's somebody I totally disagree with, and it doesn't have to pertain to, say, movies, per se. It can be about, anything. I really like the idea of trying to understand somebody in the situation of, say, I really, really, maybe I just completely disagree with them, or maybe even where it's this heightened thing, and I'm really at odds with what they're saying. But in order to understand kind of their perspective, and I think for me to maybe bring a case as to why I believe a certain way, I want to really try to understand what that other person is talking about. And especially if they're bringing a presentation where, it's articulate, it's thought provoking, and it's intelligent. And I think you need to kind of understand the perspective from those other, from the other side of the of the world, or of the spectrum, as far as around opinions. And I think it really kind of shapes your argument, and just a sense of understanding. And I think when you do have those kind of debates or discussions, trying to keep those things civil. In today's society, especially with social media, that whole kind of thing of being respectful has unfortunately been, kind of thrown away. So that's one thing I try to do. I try to do that in outside of film also. So, but so the experience that I had was a day. It was yesterday. I was all set. I had just finished watching this movie, and it's a documentary. It came out in 2012. The Act of Killing. It was directed by Joshua Oppenheimer, and it was produced by Werner Herzog. I had never heard of Joshua Oppenheimer before until I saw this movie. Of course, Werner Herzog is a legend in filmmaking. He's made some just incredible, incredible films. He's kind of one of my favorites. He has done lots of documentaries, and he's also done full-length films. So he produced this film, and The Act of Killing came out in 2012, and I just recently, I've seen it twice. I saw it in the theater at the Camden Film Festival, which is a really kind of predominant film festival that has emerged, and it takes place here in Maine, and it's been around for about, I think, 12 years. And the festival itself has grown to be a pretty serious destination for filmmakers. Lots of well-known filmmakers in the doc world now, the last few years, have their premieres at this festival. It's a very well regarded festival, and it's all documentaries. But I remember seeing The Act of Killing at its premiere, and then when it came out on DVD a couple of years later, I saw it. So it's been quite a few years since I had seen this movie, and I was at not Bull Moose, but I was at Goodwill, which Goodwill is kind of my second favorite place to go to buy movies. I typically buy tons of newer films there, Blu-rays. They have an amazing selection, and it's always the case, like anything, whenever I go shopping, especially like, say, at Bull Moose. I love being surprised, where you're like, holy shit, I can't believe this, they have this here, and or I can't believe they have this movie here, and it's like so cheap, and it's hasn't even been used, and that it's that discovery that I love. And I found this at Goodwill, which I was just totally blown away by, and it was only $10, and it was unused. It was sealed, perfect condition, and I picked it up, and I really again, it's been years since I'd seen this film, but I remember this movie being just oh, just beyond really anything I had seen at the time, and even kind of, in terms of today. It's just such a gut wrenching, dark exploration of kind of human nature, unlike anything else. And it's also one of the most surreal and one of the most strange films I've ever seen. And it's totally out there. And there are moments in this film that you kind of can't believe what you're seeing. And so I picked this up and I watched it the other night. And I didn't realize that there's two discs. There's two discs on this in this collection. There is a theatrical cut, which is the one I saw, but this set includes a director's cut, which I've never seen, and the regular theatrical version is about 2 hours or so, a little less. Which typically for documentaries a lot of the times tend to be a little bit on the shorter side. But this is a pretty lengthy documentary. But I saw that there was a director's cut, so I watched that the other night, and that was a full 3 hours. And it was funny, I didn't realize what I was watching, and I'm like, wow, this movie is long. It took me 2 days to get through it. Mainly because of the subject matter and just how brutal this movie is, and just how terrifying in a lot of ways. So I needed time to kind of like break it up and kind of process, what I'm going through watching this film. I do that sometimes, like where I will, if I'm really into a movie, and it can be for a horror movie, it can be for anything, or a fictionalized horror film, but it can be with any genre. Sometimes that will happen with me when I watch a movie, where I will be so focused on it, I will be so absorbed and so into it that I will almost have to like pause the movie. And this happens at home when I'm watching a movie. I'll have to pause the movie and like do something for like 5 or 10 minutes and kind of like process what's going on. Like for instance, like I'll watch a movie. It's happened to me many times where I'll be watching a movie and I'm just like, it's like this crazy weird shot of like adrenaline, and I get really excited and I'm so into it and totally absorbed. And then I start getting this feeling of, wow, there's a lot to kind of take in here. There's a lot to process. So when that happens, I will like pause the movie and like go do something totally non-film related for like 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I'll like, there's been many times of where that will happen, and I'll pause the movie and I'll decide to like clean my house, wash my dishes, or clean the floor, or go online for a few minutes and like check my emails, or watch some stupid video that I come across, just to kind of like process what's going on. And sometimes I'll just sit in silence. And I had a friend years ago who was very much into film, and he said that he would do that a lot with certain films because he'd be so into it. He would have to be like, oh, okay, I gotta pause for the cause and kind of process what's going on because I'm so into it, and then come back to it. And it's kind of interesting. So that happened big time with this film, enough to where I had to kind of like break it up. And basically, I started watching the film a little bit on the late side anyway, but I found myself, okay, I need to probably take a break. This is very intense, to say the least, and I'm going to pause it, and then I'm going to watch it the next night. So that's exactly what I did. And I mean, as a film, as a documentary, I feel like this film, it's definitely a documentary, obviously, but I feel it's very theatrical, and it feels like a movie. I definitely think at the end of the day, this is like the most gut wrenching, most powerful, and truly a scary film. Again, I love horror. I love horror to death. But it's all for me. It's the reason I love horror, the horror genre so much is for me it's like pure escapism. It's like going on that amazing ride at a cool amusement park, and it's about like the the fear, but it's exciting, the escapism, the thrills. To me, that's what it is. But it's pure entertainment. It's total fictionalized. Um, but when I see a film like this, The Act of Killing, which is about the unfortunate and horrific side to human nature, this to me is truly terrifying. This film is about the real life monster, or the real life monsters that live in your closet, uh, or that live under your bed. The monster that comes out at night when you turn off the lights. It's not metaphor. You're not dealing with fairy tales. This is like the real grotesque side of our nature. So it really, I don't know, that kind of, when something stands out as strong as this film does, it really kind of drives those points home for me personally. The premise of this film is just bonkers crazy. I've been talking about this film a lot. I talked about it. I've been bringing this film up to about since I saw it. I've talked to like three different friends who, and a couple of them are really into film. And for the most part, I don't know either. None of those friends that I talked to about this film had seen this film before, or I don't believe they'd heard of it before. And I don't know anybody personally who has seen this movie. So it was a huge film. It had a lot of. I think it was nominated for an Academy Award. It had a lot of acclaim when it came out, but I kind of forgot about it for various reasons. Joshua Oppenheimer, the director, came out with a movie a few years ago, which I believe won an Academy Award, which I have not seen. But the way, the basic premise of this film is about this true life kind of Holocaust genocide that actually happened in Indonesia in the late 50s into the 60s. And basically, it's like an historical account. It's based on actual events. But during the late 50s and into the 60s, Indonesia did at one point have a thriving democracy. And the head military leader, General Suprapto, who was the military leader in the country, decided to basically have have a coup and use his army that was comprised of these crazed paramilitary thugs. He used his army to take over the government, overthrow the government. And leading up to this overtaking of the government, they General Soporto used these very intense propaganda methods to bring about the idea of communism being the biggest threat. The threat of the rise of unions, where workers were trying to pull together to help themselves, their families, their financial lots, and to just have a more respectability as humans in the economy and in the social kind of stratus of Indonesia at the time. So they manufactured this whole kind of outlandish claim that this was the rise of communism. So this is why we're going to take over the government. And while that was happening, they systematically, General Soporto and his military gang of thugs, slaughtered and killed up to about 2 million people, women, children, the elderly, just some of the most heinous atrocities that one can imagine. And during this course and years later, there was no justice for the victims. None of the people, none of the thugs and monsters that were responsible for these heinous atrocities. No one was brought to justice. There was no there was no I don't believe there was even one case where someone was brought to trial or had even charges filed against them. And a lot of these culprits that were involved with this genocide just basically went about their lives and had long and prosperous lives. Many of them have passed away, many are still alive, and they've gone on to live this long life, having grandchildren and getting married and having all kinds of different various successes in their life. So the premise of this film was that Joshua Oppenheimer approached these monsters that were responsible for this genocide. And the idea of what he had was to basically, he approached these guys, got in contact with them, and his idea was to get them to make a movie, a theatrical film, where they would reenact their ways of killing, but the one thing that they would do with the film, or the way the roles were, was that these perpetrators of this heinous violence, they would play the victims in the film. So it's kind of this like movie within a movie. And just that premise alone is completely bonkers and insane, and something, we've never seen before. So that's what this film is, and it is a deep exploration of pure evil as far as I'm concerned, because they are complete and utter sociopaths. There is no there's all of these kind of reenactments, these theatrical reenactments of these grotesque acts of violence. And there's also all of these interviews with these men who are now in their 70s, who have, gone on to just live regular lives after being responsible for, all of these deaths. One character in particular, Anwar Congo, who was at one point during the height of this coup d'etat, was the most feared man in the country. And all of these guys were just hardcore gangsters. Like, they basically would rob and steal and extort people using all kinds of violence. If they would burn, kill an entire family because the debt wasn't paid. They would burn people's houses down. They would burn whole villages down. They would round up the children, rape them, execute, take all of the elderly and put them in these like basically concentration camps and torture them to death. The most heinous things, well, beyond the most heinous things that you can possibly imagine. And in this movie, along with these incredibly bizarre theatrical stagings of what they did, there's lots of just interviews of them talking and how just nonchalant they are about the murdering and the raping and the torture that they used, and the methods of what they, the techniques that they used to commit these acts. They appear, especially Anwar Congo, who is he was one of the biggest leaders. He is so nonchalant about expressing these atrocities, and how it was like, walking his dog, or taking his grandkid to a baseball game. I mean, just like. And Anwar Congo, he passed away recently, about 7 years ago. And he lived to be about into his 80s, like 86 or 87. So he lived a long life and was never tried or anything for these crimes. And so, and he was, and by all reported accounts, Anwar Congo just himself was supposedly responsible for 1,000 deaths. One person responsible for 1,000 deaths. And that's not talking about his collaboration with the army, his death squad, and death squads that he worked with. I mean, you can't even comprehend that level of evil. And the thing is about this film is you can't, I mean, obviously we live in predominantly a Christian Judeo society, and we, whether or not we are practitioners of those two religions or the Abrahamic religions, the doctrine and kind of the Christian myth is so kind of a part of our social fabric. So often, in terms of like when we talk about when the topic of like real evil comes up in our society, people talk about it in terms of like being some kind of you know um, devil or some kind of demon, some kind of unholy force, like some kind of unholy force that exists in this world. And that's usually the discussion, which to me is always, I've seen the argument where people who, when they talk about people who survived the concentration camps in, Auschwitz and Krakow during, Hitler's reign, I've seen that discussion come in of like, of even, bringing in that Christian idea or that doctrine of what evil and where it takes on this, it's something otherworldly, beyond something that we can understand. And I think that aside from the, without having, say, in room for the discussion to talk about the myth of what evil is, the make believe aspect, the symbolic aspect, which is very important to understand. But the discussion should always be focused on legitimate evil, and these acts are committed by mortal men who get up in the morning, brush their teeth, kiss their kids good morning, take them to work, kiss their wife good night, pay their taxes. True evil is committed by people in everyday situations, and it has nothing to do with some kind of anthropomorphic, devil or some demon or or some embodiment of evil with a pitchfork. I mean, that's it's Jack and a beanstalk. It's metaphor. It's symbolism. But this is an examination of true evil, and just how you have on these two or three spectrums of like kind of the human animal, the human condition. And I've talked about it a lot before, where you have humans and the different how complex we are, but our capabilities. Where you have on one hand you have people who can do miraculous and beautiful things. Wondrous discoveries in science, in philosophy, or beautiful paintings, beautiful works of art, beautiful albums of music. Doing people, having this sense of altruism and doing some really beautiful things for people that they care about. You have that kind of aspect, the inspiring, the positive, nurturing and nourishing aspects to our species. But then you also have people who are complete and utter sociopaths and have committed, all kinds of atrocities of where they have attempted to exterminate or have exterminated whole fractions of their fellow man. And so the full spectrum of how and again, no other creature in the animal kingdom does that to their fellow creature. So it's man is a very unique creature, and a very unique bastard, you know. So And this film really examines that. So anyway, I was all set to. I recorded the show. I watched it again last night. I watched a 3 hour, or I should say 2 nights ago, and I watched a 3 hour version of it, not really realizing the film was that long. I got through it and I finished it, and again, it's the for what it is. I think it's the most powerful documentary and the most horrific documentary I've ever seen. So yesterday I was all set and I did a review like I'm doing now. I did a whole review of the movie, and I did what I usually do, where I write up a text, a little synopsis of the movie, find a good thumbnail photo, and all those kinds of things. So yesterday I did that in the morning and got that all done, and then I took a break from it, and then I did a couple other things for an hour or two, and then I came back and I came inside the house and I was getting ready to post the video. I was usually what I do is I upload after I'm done with the video and it's ready. I will like upload it to my YouTube channel, and then after that's done, I'll share it around. I'll share it to my personal page, and then on Facebook, and then I'll share it to my Film Fanatic page on Facebook. And there's also a couple of other Facebook pages, movie pages that I am part of, and then there's one or two or one that I'm the administrator for. So typically, when I'm done with a movie, that's what I'll do. Movie review was I'll share it to all of these different pages, and then sometimes what I'll do is I'll do like a supplement kind of review of the film, or I'll just use the photo and I just write in text or an additional review, a non-video review. That's typically what I do. So I was all set to do that. I was getting ready. I had it all set up, and I actually did upload it to my channel, and then I was going to share it, and I wanted to kind of like look up a couple extra things about the act of killing before I posted it, like just maybe some additional information, maybe find a couple other names that I could tag, and incorporate into the text. And so when I did that, it came up that Anwar Congo, who is essentially the lead in this movie, that he because I was curious. This movie came out in 2012, and I was curious, are any of these guys still alive? Because they were like in their 60s at that point, and I was just curious, were they still alive, or did any of them go to prison or get executed? And so I was curious about that. So I looked it up, and I came across this article about Anwar Congo dying, and he died about 7 years ago. So I came across this article that Anwar Congo had died, and he was, like I said before earlier in the show, he during this horrendous time in history in Indonesia, he was the most feared figure and you know, he was the most feared person and figure in the takeover. And these guys were all gangsters. They were all like showboating their money in the film, showboating about how much money they had. They were, even now, or at least when this movie came out in 2012, it shows them like going out partying and like going out for these lavish meals and spending all this money and having like kids and having these wives and nice families and grandkids and just living it up. And they're all like super over the top and flamboyant, and they are just it's unbelievable. There's even a scene which I just could not fucking believe, where they interview a lot of these other figures that were responsible for these atrocities, and they're basically bragging right on camera about raping kids, raping 13 and 14-year-old women, and they go into the details of what they did, and they're just like patting each other on the back, and they are just like loving life and think it's the coolest thing, and that they are just like the kings. And these were interviews that were done at that time, and this was like, 30 years after the fact. And it's just like the most, again, it's one of those things where you can't really sit through watching it, but it's, on one hand, it's important to see it, but it's also so vile and like beyond comprehension and beyond any. It's literally, it was literally the most disgusting fucking thing I've ever seen in my life, but yet at the same time, I was just enamored by what I was seeing and hearing, especially when it came to them going into this area. Again, I can't compare it to anything, and to see that these men were still alive, very happy, very wealthy, living these like luxurious lives, just unbelievable. And the other thing that I found, without going off on a tangent from what I started talking about, when I was watching this film, especially around my last viewing of this film, which was a 3 hour cut, it was, it can't, again, extremely gut wrenching. But I found myself getting frustrated watching the film, and I started questioning, like, what, to a degree, what's the point of this film? Is this to show? Is this to bring? On one hand, I looked at it. Okay, is this the point of this film? Is it to bring this whole horrendous, horrific period of history to the light, and to show that this thing happened, and to explore a period in history that's not talked about enough? Was it that? And then part of me also felt, because of the odd, I felt like the Joshua Oppenheimer is in the film himself. You can hear him talking to a lot of these guys. He's this film. The other thing too is they work together. They this film took about 8 years for them to make. So it was like all of these interviews and all of these shoots. They were working together for almost 8 years, which is just crazy. And so on the other hand side of it, there's all these scenes where Joshua Oppenheimer is in the movie, and you hear him talking to each of these guys, especially Anwar Congo, and I got the sense that like he is he has a connection with them, or he's like empathetic towards them to some degree, and that he is, on one hand, obviously they're human, but then they are complete monsters. And I kind of got the sense to a degree that, which I almost didn't want to admit, but I got the sense that maybe he's like using this thing to try to humanize these monsters, and to try to like, in a way of acceptance, not just to the realization that they are human, but having sympathy for them to some degree. And it really fucked with me in a lot of ways, and it really made me think. I found myself getting really frustrated, and there's all these scenes where they're in the room with these guys, just talking, and they're drinking alcohol or drinking coffee or eating meals and hanging out with their kids. And there were so many moments where, especially further into the movie, I got where I was like, wow, how can these guys, how can Joshua Oppenheimer, how can these filmmakers, spend so much time and break bread and like hang out with these guys, like they're hanging out with their friends. How can they spend so much time and intimate and all, and have these intimate moments with these like pure fucking evil monsters? Like how can you do that? Like, I couldn't comprehend that. And there were a lot of moments where I was just like thinking, if I was the one shooting this film, I would last probably 5 or 10 minutes doing this, going through this process, because if I was sitting there holding the camera and these motherfuckers are bragging about raping kids and like killing, thousands of people in the course of like 10 hours, I would just like drop the camera and want to fucking kill these people instantly and just like end them, you know? That was my instinct. Like, how can you, you know, with as a human being with, you know, sense of justice or rationality and compassion, how can you sit there and sit through this fucking shit for hours? 8 years of it. So it was a weird reaction. I've never, you know, again, I love films. I love documentaries. I have this fucking channel. I talk about all my experiences. I watch movies all the time. I watch them every day. I have never had that kind of reaction to a film. And granted, this is a documentary, but it is very much a theatrical experience. So I kind of feel that this is a movie more so. But in all of my time, I have never ever had that reaction to a film. So again, getting back to what I was saying before, I went to go post the video. I posted the video onto my YouTube channel, and then I was going to share it around. And during that time, I was looking up some last minute details, and I had seen that Anwar Congo had passed away about 7 or 8 years ago, and came across this article, and I came across an interview that Joshua Oppenheimer had given, and the interview was about him being informed from Anwar Congo's widow that he had died. And this interview was done in the national paper, one of the big papers in Indonesia, about Anwar Congo's passing and his work with him, Joshua Oppenheimer's work with him, and this film, The Act of Killing. And in the interview, Joshua Oppenheimer says that when he heard the news of Anwar Congo dying, he broke down in tears and he was broken. He became, he started crying and he was broken down. And then he went on to say how he considered Anwar Congo to be a really close friend on a personal level. He also said that Anwar Congo had one of the greatest imaginative, creative or basically he was saying that he felt Anwar Congo was one of the most creative and one of the most imaginative person that he ever knew and that he's ever worked with. And then he went on to say also that Anwar Congo was having health issues later on in his life, and he said that in the interview, Joshua had reached out to Anwar Congo and went out of his way to try to get him into the most well-respected hospital in Indonesia to get him the best care that a person can get in Indonesia. And my first reaction was I couldn't fucking believe it. I couldn't believe it. And then he also went on to say, Joshua Oppenheimer also went on to say that when addressing the incredibly vile acts that he committed, he basically said it's a shame that because Anwar Congo could have been a better person, and because he did these heinously awful things, but he could have been a better person. And I kind of could not believe what I was fucking reading. And immediately within 2 minutes or 2 seconds after reading this article, my first reaction, I was like, fuck this guy, fuck this movie, and I fucking deleted it. And I was like, fuck this. This is fucking disgusting. This is almost as disgusting as the film's subject matter. I couldn't fucking believe it. And I have never, ever in my life, when it comes to film or anything in art, I've had that reaction to something. So I ended up deleting the movie. I deleted the review. I was like, fuck this horse shit. And it got to the point where I was even, as Werner Herzog produced the film, but I almost was like, I almost had this reaction to Werner Herzog, who I really love and admire as a filmmaker, but I didn't. Because his name is attached to the film. He did produce the film, he financed the film. But this was an interview that he gave, Joshua Oppenheimer had given separately years after the movie was done, and it was all regarding Anwar Congo's death. And I just couldn't fucking believe it that he came out and had the audacity to kind of humanize this person because he established a working and personal relationship this person. That's one thing. But then when he said that he extended himself to the point of where he was trying to legitimately help him, that's where for me, I drew a line. I was like, okay, this guy is a living, breathing, fucking, antichrist, monster of the fucking worst kind. And you're going, because you have a personal relationship, you're going to extend yourself using your status and your power to help this guy live more. How can you, like, even in any conscious realm or form, do that to extend yourself to an act of compassion for somebody who has raped and killed millions of people and never ever was fucking just never ever brought to justice in any way, shape, or form. To me it just, it crossed this line, and I have never had that experience with a filmmaker before, or a film. So that's what happened. And again, I a lot of the times when I talk about movies and my reviews of certain things, my ideas around certain things, you know, I don't think enjoying films or enjoying art or having that experience, I don't really feel it's an intellectual thing. For me personally, I feel like it's really about my kind of gut reaction to things, my primal reaction to things. Of course, I try to think about things, and some things that I experience are very thought provoking, which is great, and that's kind of what I want to hopefully happen, and question things. But and my initial response around art has usually always been, kind of face value and how it makes me feel in the moment. And I find 9 times out of the ten, that reaction kind of is an indicator on whether I'm really into something or not, or I'm moved by something or not. There are instances of where some things take a while to kind of resonate with you. You might have a very different opinion days after you've experienced it, the art. But generally, I feel like it's pretty fair to say that it's usually spot on and pretty accurate. Um, and in this situation of how I reacted, which again I was surprised, but it was, without thinking about it, it was totally in the moment, and it was how I felt, and without overly thinking about it, it was just like how I reacted. Um, and again, I have never had this fucking experience before. And again, it's a, I love a lot of filmmakers that have been in their personal lives, have been shrouded in all kinds of controversy. For instance, I'm a huge Roman Polanski fan. And for all intents and purposes, he's he's a convicted pedophile. Granted, the complex situations with his wife being murdered, Sharon Tate, by the Manson family, and all of the things that happened, obviously very very complex. And but he, at the end of the day, he is a convicted sex offender, and I still watch his movies. He fled the country and lives out of the jurisdiction of the United States, so The feds cannot get him and have not been able to get him. I regard Roman Polanski as one of my favorite filmmakers, and I um, love his films. I've talked about his films. I continue to watch his films. And I've had this thing of where I feel like I've been pretty good, and I think it's, I can understand that line being blurred, but for me, I've always kind of separated the actor or the director or the musician uh, from their art. Like what they do in their personal lives, I've always felt, obviously it's a reflection, but what they do in their personal lives is a little bit of a separate thing to a degree. And there's arguments for both of those things, but I feel like I can still separate those two. A big example for me is I I'm actually a big fan of reading um, Mein Kampf, which is Hitler's manifesto. On one hand, it's completely disgusting and you're repelled by it, but it's also a fascinating look into a mind of Hitler, and you really get a mental picture of how fucking insane he was. But I can read that book and I own it, um, and to where I can still separate the way I am kind of learning about him, and not taking this other approach of where I think Mein Kampf, all of the copies of Mein Kampf should be burnt and thrown into the fire and eradicated from the pages of history because of Hitler being such a monster. Because for me, that is, that it's one of the most horrific periods of history, but we need to understand that. So it's erasing history, and that's and I also feel that's crossing the line for me personally as far as that's censorship. And other examples that I have is like I'm a big Mel Gibson fan, and I think he's directed some amazing films. I think he's also acted in some amazing films, and I've always been a big fan of his, and I still watch his films. Years ago, he got in a lot of controversy for his, heinously bad anti-Semitic remarks, and he got in a lot of trouble for it. And he did apologize for those things. He was, under the influence of alcohol and whatnot. Not to make excuses for that, but I knew lots of people that completely boycotted him and were never have come out and said they will never watch a Mel Gibson movie. They will never watch anything he's directed because of those remarks. Other examples would be um, Lars von Trier, who I think he's a German director. He's an amazing director. He's made some incredible films. The film that he made that I think is probably his best and the most important film that he's ever made, the most powerful movie, is a movie called The Antichrist with Willem Dafoe. Just one of the most powerful and one of the most intense films ever made. He's made some really great films. And a few years back, he had done a movie, was doing a press conference, and it was all recorded. The whole world saw it. And somehow it got onto the subject of World War II. And he came out, Lars von Trier, and he's German. He came out during this Q&A and basically said he's a Holocaust denier. He does not believe that the Holocaust exists, which is fucking insane and crazy. But again, it's a complex thing. I still watch his movies. I still really respect him as a film director. I, I, not defending that fucking disgusting attitude, but I do in a weird way. I do separate those two. I look at his work for what it is, and I do very much consider myself. Still love his work. I still will watch it. Um, I don't have a problem with firing up and watching Antichrist. And again, that's a personal choice, but I understand the arguments around that to like boycott him or never to watch his films or to base his art for just the sake of the art. Another example would be Woody Allen. Huge Woody Allen fan. But, huge Woody Allen fan. But again, in his personal life, he was kind of a pedophile. And so I know lots of people that don't think he is just a piece of shit, and they don't watch any Woody Allen movies. I remember having conversations with friends and people over the years of where people will be like almost mad at me when I have come out and said, "Oh, I really, one of my favorite directors is Woody Allen," and I'll bring up a movie of his, and I'll be like, "Hey," it will come up in conversation. I'll be like, "Hey, have you seen this movie?" And I've had that happen to me once or twice where a person will be outraged. They'll be like, "How can you like this guy? The guy's a fucking pedophile and he's disgusting. How can you acknowledge his work?" And my argument has always been that I do separate the two. It's not black and white. And I understand both sides of those arguments, but personally that's how I've always kind of navigated through to that. And again, it's very complex. So those are some examples of that, where this people look at it as like there's a litmus test or whatnot. Um, it's even with the idea around the, say like Nazi aesthetics. Like there's a lot of people in the world, and I remember years ago, Arnold Schwarzenegger, for instance, got in a lot of trouble because it had come out that he was an avid collector of Nazi memorabilia, and that is an entirely uh, onto itself a subculture of people who collect taboo things, and so there are people who collect Nazi memorabilia and it's worth lots of money and they trade and they sell their work, and people have lost their jobs and their careers for it. I still watch Schwarzenegger movies. I still love Schwarzenegger movies. And when it comes to that actual subject, I understand I do have a fascination, especially how the Nazis and the Third Reich incorporated like the occult element, um, and where they pulled their influences from and the aesthetics around it. It to me it's very interesting and fascinating. But I definitely am not empathetic towards them, and um, I have a total subjective view, an objective view of it. But there are certain things around it that I find fascinating and interesting. So those are examples of kind of the same situation to a point with this film, The Act of Killing. But I feel, for me, at face value, this situation kind of eclipses all of those situations. And for me, the exact point where that happened is when Joshua Oppenheimer extended himself to the point of where he was going out of his way, using his power as a director, his clout as having a name, to help Anwar Congo, who was the head leader in these atrocities, to actually help him, um, and get him to the most predominant hospital in Indonesia, and also give him the best health care that he could get. To me, that was it. When I saw that, I was just like, fuck this guy, done. So it's, again, it's a very interesting conversation. It really, I don't know, it's a lot to think about. I made this whole video just on this, and this whole video is a fucking hour. So, but again, if anybody can sit through this and checks and wants to, and actually checks out this video and thinks that, there are parts of it that are interesting, maybe they don't, maybe you think it's too long-winded, totally understandable. But if there are certain things around this video that you might find interesting, um, please comment. I think this is a discussion worth having. I think it's something that's even more important now in a lot of ways because of where we are as in the climate that we are currently in. When I talk about that, I mean now it's like, a lot of things happen where a lot of directors, filmmakers, people who have YouTube channels, people who have talk about quote unquote controversial opinions. We live in a time now where people do get censored. People are not allowed to speak. It happens a lot at universities. People are not allowed to speak. People do get banned based on, say, accusation. And if it's something that this does not fit a lot of the times in the status quo of our social times, and it's regarded as, beyond politically incorrect, a lot of there is censorship going on in America right now. Things are being banned, and I think that is frightening as all hell. So, and in the case of, say, for instance, Joshua Oppenheimer, who made this film, as strong as my reaction has been to this movie, and again, it's a reaction that I did not expect, and I've never had happen to me before. As strong as my reaction is to this, and my kind of my convictions around it, I would never in a million years say that because of my opinion, where I feel kind of violated in every conceivable way, I would never say in a million years that this movie should be banned and not shown anywhere, or should I would never say that this film should be banned or taken off the market and basically burnt at the stake. I'd never say that. I would be in a lot of ways I would be the biggest defender for someone like him to continue to create his art because that's free speech. For me, it's just a question of an ethical thing, a personal ethical thing. I can support or I cannot support, and I choose, because of the situation, I choose not to personally acknowledge, nor promote, nor go out of my way to talk about his work because of my personal kind of feelings around this film and the fallout many years later. But I would completely defend his right to make films and to go on to have his career and be able to share his thoughts. But I can personally not do that. And I can also spread the truth of, or at least the reasons as to why I have pulled back from actually reviewing this movie. So because of that, it's an interesting, weird dilemma, because I think at face value, this movie is an incredible documentary, and but at the same time, I don't really want to go out of my way and support this movie by even posting a thumbnail photo of it, to bring anybody, not that a lot of people watch this, not that I have like 2,000, 200 million people that watch the show. I have a nice little base of people that watch the show, and I really am appreciative of everybody who supports this channel, and it's continually growing. But I personally don't want this movie to get promoted through this page because of that. He can promote it somewhere else, just not my channel, for what it's worth. So that's what today's show is about. One of the most unusual situations I've ever been in. I've never had this happen before. So again, if you do sit through this long and winded video, and there are certain things that I'm discussing that you find kind of interesting, I think this is a really good discussion, because this does happen. It comes up a lot, especially this day and age. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.